Hello and welcome to the Cuyamonga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And of course, on behalf of our Board of Directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we do want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamonga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist, Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. It's part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So as an educational institution, we do take an open approach. We created this Sunday roundtable discussion as an opportunity to invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. We've been doing this for a number of years. We have 150 or more of these presentations available for free on YouTube, et cetera, and along with some podcasts, another 100 or so. And so you're welcome to join all of that.
We're trying to move the dial with dialogue.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Today, are we living through a collective dark night of the soul? How did we all come together? How did we come together and address this? As a global community, we're experiencing anxiety about the future of humanity and the world. How can we channel this very rational fear that we're experiencing and help mitigate this global challenges that are facing us? It's our view that we're participating in an emerging global collective consciousness that has the potential to advance our world at this critical stage of planetary evolution.
Well, it is so critical. The threats to annihilation just keep piling up and on a global scale. So indeed, we're all in it together. You know, it used to be, oh, just find a desk to dust under when the missiles launch. That desk will protect you. But looming now is a third world war, climate change burning the house down, multitudes of species disappearing, and now AI and the robots have been unleashed. So what do we do about this? While the planet's richest build their deluxe, let's write out the apocalypse bunkers, we here at C4E, we turn instead to that time-honored and rather more accessible way to process our PTSD. Let's talk. Let's talk our way through this about what it means, how it is impacting us individually as well as collectively. How do we find our way? How do we navigate this broken world? And how do we turn this into a rite of passage and emerge the better for it? Well, our guest this week has something to say about this. He writes that early on, he realized the fate of the Earth was more than a scientific question. It was a question of human values. And Randy Morris is our guest. We met him at the New Cosmic Story conference at the Whidbey Institute. Let's welcome him as I tell you about him. Randy says, the landscape into which we were born has much to say about our future work in the world. And indeed, his trajectory is so transparent there. Randy grew up in Richland, Washington. That's home to the Hanford nuclear site and the plutonium manufacture for the bomb. He then spent 3 of his 10 years teaching grades K through 12 at the Hiroshima International School in Japan. He co-authored a book about this, Nagasaki Spirits, Hiroshima Voices, Making Sense of the Nuclear Age. And so he traces a line to his key academic inquiry over 30 years at Antioch University in Seattle, where now Professor Emeritus, he long coordinated the psychology and spiritual studies. The fate of the Earth and the role of human character playing in shaping this fate is your key quest. I understand that, Randy. Thank you and welcome. Oh, I forgot to mention you're also a Jungian scholar. This is the other. We have to have you back about Jung as well. And he's the co-president of the C.G. Jung Society of Seattle. So, elderhood, passages, rites of passage, dream work. You're the guy we want to talk to today about all this, Randy.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
And I think you said you wanted to start with a poem and possibly light a candle. This begin.
Yes, indeed. It's my tradition whenever speaking to light a candle. And so I will do that right now. I've got my little candle thing here. And this candle is lit for the wisdom in each of us, and a special kind of wisdom that only happens when we're together as a group.
Mm.
I'm reminded every time I light a candle of a well-known dream by the psychologist C.G. Jung, in which he's in the midst of a storm and winds are buffeting him all around, and he's got his hands cupped around this little light, and he realizes the most important thing he can possibly do is to keep this candle burning. And so it's a reminder of the importance of consciousness and awareness in each one of us, that no one's more special than anyone else. It takes everyone's light. Keeping that light alive is what we need to be doing in this time of the dark night of the soul. So I'd like to read this poem too. It's a favorite of mine, and I think it will shape a little bit of what we talk about today. It's called Summons by Aurora Levins Morales. It goes like this. Last night I dreamed 10,000 grandmothers from the 1,200 corners of the earth walked out into the gap, one breath deep between the bullet and the flesh, between the bomb and the family. They told me, we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious. So it will have to be us. They said, we will cup our hands around each heart. We will sing the earth's song, the song of water, a song so beautiful that vengeance will turn to weeping. The mourners will embrace, and grief replace every impulse towards harm. 10,000 is not enough, they said. So we have sent this dream like a flock of doves into the sleep of the world. Wake up, put on your shoes. You who are hearing this, I am bringing bandages and a bag of scented guavas from my trees. I think I remember the tune. Meet me at the corner. Let's go.
Beautiful.
Indeed.
So we're all meeting at the corner here, and the impulse is towards healing. So let's go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that we've gone from a midlife crisis, each of us individually, to the collective midlife crisis. I think this is an existential crisis, right? Our very existence is at threat. I mean, that's expanding the definition of an existential crisis. But um, we believe too that it has to come back to our worldview and our values and how we see our world and our place in it. And so I appreciate the journey that you've taken. But tell us about your journey and how it began. How did your upbringing and where you grew up start to shape your path? And I know you'll speak to it from your depth psychology background, your Jungian background, your all of that. But take us on your
I
journey.
was a kid from Richland. Yeah.
Yeah, growing up in Richland, Washington. Yeah.
Well, let me start with two sort of principles. One is that changing your worldview is an easy thing to say, but it's really, really difficult to do.
Mhm.
And it's because we were raised a certain way and reality took that shape in which we were raised. And so if you're going to change that worldview that you just drank, like milk from your mother, it's going to require a very difficult dark night of the personal soul. So I just want to say shifting worldviews like what we're talking about doing at a collective level is very difficult to do. Yeah.
Hard enough individually, even harder collectively. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that, I mean, I'm happy to tell my story and we'll do that right now. But, if you had asked me to tell this story, say, a year ago, it'd probably be, different. And it's a reminder, that memory is not a static thing. There's not these facts that we remember and then we always remember it that way. We always are re-remembering. And so
Mhm.
I'll tell the story as I'm thinking about it now. So basically, I was born in 1950, always struck by the fact that that's right in the middle of the 20th century. I was the youngest of four kids. My father was a high school teacher at Richland High School, home of the Bombers. Um,
The bombers.
Richland was a very strange place to grow up because your friends either didn't know what their father did or couldn't talk about it because it was a secret city. So there's secrets everywhere. And so you just know you just can't go in that direction. And fathers would get on the buses in the morning and they'd disappear into the desert, into those nuclear reactors in Hanford. And they'd come back in the evening and they never talked about their work. But what
Rather stifles the dinner table conversation at home again, doesn't it? Yeah.
So what they were doing, though, is creating the plutonium for the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, and then later continuing to build plutonium for our nuclear arsenal. And the problem that they never figured out is what to do with the waste. And so now that area, Hanford, is the most polluted place in all of North America, and one of the top three polluted places in the world. Uh, that nuclear waste is leaking out of containers and slowly draining towards the Columbia River.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so that's a whole other story. We're not
And
going
then
to
the
get
Pacific, right?
Right.
Yeah.
ultimately into the Pacific, but so I was born in 1950 there, and as a result of that, my thyroid is registered with the U.S. government because in 1949 there was a massive radiation leak from the Hanford plant. A big plume of smoke came out of the stack and went down the Columbia River in the air. And they've done all this research showing the increase of cancers that perfectly correspond to the shape of the plume going down.
Oh
And
my.
I mean, fortunately, my health has not been affected so far, but it's interesting that the government's interested in my body, because of that. Anyway, so I'm the youngest of four kids. It's a classic 1950s childhood, playing around and, 1950s. My mother was a homemaker. But the information that I was getting about who I was came primarily from my mother's side of the family. She was the daughter of a doctor who came out from the Mayo Clinic to Seattle in 1917 to start a hospital based on the idea of the Mayo Clinic. And that hospital's still going. It's named after her, the Virginia Mason Hospital.
Wow.
But my father was a high school teacher, and so we were raised on that salary, four kids um, on a teacher's salary. So we never really had very much money, but we didn't notice it then. It wasn't a big deal. Nobody else did either. It was a 1950s childhood, what can I say? But on my mother's side, her father, my grandfather, was the oldest of five boys, all of whom were either doctors or Episcopal priests. And so when I was growing up, those are sort of the two imaginations that I was told would be sort of acceptable to become.
Mhm.
And
Hint,
in the
hint.
beginning,
Yeah.
I was kind of a dreamy kid, like, well, I mean, and the youngest is always going, whoa, well, what are those people doing? What are those big people doing? Um, and so, that sense of wonder permeated my consciousness. And I thought, well, yeah, being an Episcopal priest, that'd be pretty cool. And so somebody asked me as a 5 or 6 year old, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, Episcopal priest. Everybody thought that was pretty weird, but made sense
Uh,
at the time. And then because of my grandfather left a scholarship at a boarding school in Virginia called the Episcopal High School, which is next to the Episcopal Theological Seminary. Um, I had started getting in trouble when I started thinking about going to the only high school in town where my father taught. I didn't get along real well with my dad, and I wanted out. And so this was an opportunity. So I got on a train in Pasco, Washington, and for 3 days traveled to Washington, D.C. and Alexandria, Virginia, and spent 9 months there. Then I'd come back for the summers. And that cured me of ever wanting to be an Episcopal priest. So then, the doctor possibility came available, and I was pre-med in college. I was in college from 1968 to 72, and that was a pretty wild time, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. And um, so I won't go into all that, but basically what happened my junior year, I had a chance to go to Europe. I found out that if you run for treasurer of the student body, you get paid $1,000. So I ran for treasurer of the student body, won. First thing I did was write my check $1,000 and went to Europe for the summer. And
Smart use of those funds.
and there I had
Yeah.
truly, that's when I first started to wake up. First started
Mhm.
The awakening.
And I was 21. I was reading the Pentagon Papers. Some of you may remember those, and reading short stories by Borges. And I had separated from my two friends and was on my own for a few days in the Isle of Skye. And I remember waiting for the ferry, climbing up the mountain behind it, and lying on my back and looking up at the clouds and going, you know, I'm a child of freedom. You know, I don't have to go to medical school. I can do it. I can just drop out of college if I want to. It's like, in fact, I can do anything I want to. Like this concept had
That's right.
never really been available to me before because I was living out of my family system, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And to discover oneself as an agent of freedom is is an
Exhilarating.
exhilarating body experience, you know?
Mhm.
Well, so I go back to my senior year of college, and all of a sudden, I'm like really interested in what's going on as opposed to grinding out those repetitive lab reports. And I got really interested in ecology because ecology was a new term. I mean, it had been going on in different departments over the um, around the world, but it was just entering into consciousness, the notion of ecology, that we're connected in these
Mhm.
ecological zones and everything is related to everything else. So instead of sort of the Newtonian view of billiard balls hitting each other and cause and effect, you realize, no, it's not the object of things, it's the relationship between things that's the most
Mhm.
important. And again, in freedom, well, all my teachers, they're all into this Newtonian worldview, but I realized no, they're not paying attention to what's in between. And I have to admit, I did have a couple of very important psychedelic experiences, and one of them was walking in a park on a Saturday morning after a rainstorm, and with a couple friends and admiring everything. It's so beautiful, doing a little psilocybin, and I step into a mud puddle, and I go, oh, and I turn around and look at the mud puddle, and I can see that I've caused all this mud to come up, and the mud puddle is just swirling like this, and I get absolutely fascinated by it, right? Get down on my hands and knees, and I stare at that mud puddle for like 20 minutes and just watch it slowly settle down like that. But what I was really doing is remembering my biology lab from the previous week where we had taken drops of pond water and put them under a dissecting microscope and
Yeah.
see these little rotifers, these little multicellular animals with these little cilia on them, and they'll be like this, and they'll bump into each other and they'll go off, and you're wondering like, what are those beings? What are they thinking? And so while I'm watching this puddle settle down, I'm like identifying with these rotifers and in that sense of radical sympathy or radical passing over into the experience of another being that is made possible through psychedelics. I was those rotifers, and so I was feeling uh, the apocalyptic nature of things, and now things are settling down, and yeah, some of my friends died, but now everything's so. All this is going through my head, and then I stand up and I look at a couple other puddles that I had stepped in, and I'm realized, I'm creating holocausts everywhere I go,
Um,
you know. And then I looked up at the trees and I went, wait a minute, like I'm a rotifer in this ecological zone. And this ecological zone is a part of this larger ecological zone, which has been, and it just keeps going out larger and larger. And so I had
Nested realms, yeah.
a body experience of systems theory. And so I became a systems theorist and wrote my senior thesis on the ethics of ecology, East and West, because I was interested in Eastern and Western religions um, and how they talk about this sense of the web of life. And that cured me of medical school. And but as a result, I um, was bumming around the country, not knowing what to do after graduation. Ended up back on the East Coast, and I was crab fishing with a friend of mine and outside of Beaufort, South Carolina, and depressed, immensely depressed, because the world was going to hell in a handbasket then too. You know, the Vietnam War is the height of the Vietnam War. When we were doing our crab pots, we would pass by Paris Island, which is the jumping off place for the Marine Corps going to Vietnam, and watching those guys in 101-degree heat, humid, just dropping like flies. And these guys come out with the little stretchers and take them off, you know, realizing where they were going. But for the grace of God and my high draft number, I'd be there too. You know, so there was that whole sense of, you know, both the guilt of, you know, sidestepping that responsibility, but at the same time, I mean, the Vietnam War, well, what are we even doing there? All that was going through my head. And until, oh, so really depressed. And then in this little cabin on the seashore, over a period of 3 nights, I had a series of dreams that completely blew my mind. And these dreams, like the second one would pick up where the first one left off, and the third one picked up where the second one left off. And I looked at those dreams and they were like, it was like reading scripture. You know, they were mythic dreams.
Yeah.
And yet the biologist in me was going, well, wait a minute. I know that those are a function of brainwave patterns, you know, REM sleep, you know, like, is this the connection between biology and the spirit?
Mm.
Like, the scriptures, you know, still rooted in my Christian thing. The scriptures are basically biological documents, you know, that had been
Oh,
dreamed out of the body.
interesting.
Like, what's that about?
Wow.
So, I ended up in Atlanta at my aunt and uncle's house, painting houses, $5 an hour, free room and board though at my aunt and uncle's house. Um, when I thought I need to go back to school, I want to study this. And my aunt had been going to this Emory University in Atlanta and had a catalog there. And so I was looking through it thinking maybe clinical psychology is a thing. And, you know, cue the organ music and the stained glass light coming down. And I opened it up to the Institute of Liberal Arts, where you could take any class in the university. All you had to do was justify the next
Hmm.
semester of your study,
Tie
and
it
you
together.
do
Yeah.
that. Any class in the university. And I went, that's what I want to do. So I went into interview, but it, you know, it was already late August, early September. I figured I was interviewing for the following year, but ran into a person who later became a mentor of mine who interviewed me. And by the end of the conversation, he was saying, you know, somebody just dropped out. We have an open spot. Can you start school
Mhm.
in 3 weeks? I went, yeah. And that's how I ended up at the Institute of Liberal Arts, which was basically a 6-year reading program. And what I
Oh.
first got interested in was the psychologist Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, because Swiss psychologist, because he was a biologist who
Mhm.
became a psychologist.
Okay.
And because he was a biologist, his specialty was mollusks and the way that shellfish develop different shaped shells depending on their environment. So it was the connection
Like
between
we all do. So.
the DNA and the environment. So
Mhm.
and then he was really interested in little kids. And his most famous book was called The Child's Construction of Reality. And I went,
Mhm.
that's a way of framing the question that really gets at the root of what I'm interested in. How
Yeah.
does the human mind from infancy now to adulthood slowly create more and more accurate cognitive structures of the reality outside of them?
I, i.e., worldview. Yeah. How do we construct that?
Worldview construction, exactly.
Yeah. We see that as a sacred task right there. But
Right. But you can see what I was saying earlier, that
yeah.
worldview construction is a natural process, but once it's in place and
Mhm.
grounded in these earlier cognitive structures,
It's
Mhm.
very
by
difficult.
the time you're an adult, you think, oh, I want a different worldview. But you've got to go back all the way back to the beginning to reconstruct the
Underpin, pull out the
unconscious
pins to the underpinnings. Yeah.
cognitive structures. So,
Yeah.
um, well, so I was reading Piaget for a year, and I realized he keeps talking about these kids. Well, what are little kids? I was the youngest of four. I didn't really know what a little kid. I'd never been around little kids before, so I volunteered at a preschool at an innovative school, open school in Atlanta called the Paideia School, and fell in love with little kids, little 3 to 5 year olds. Oh my God. I was trying to learn guitar. I only knew 3 chords, but they just thought I was a rock god. And they were so wonderful and so lively, and they brought me out of my funk, and I just really enjoyed teaching the little kids. So I did that for 3 years. And then I had the idea, if I'm going to really understand how these cognitive structures develop, I'm going to have to teach all ages. I want to do a 10-year project where I teach K through 12, every age. And I actually was able to pull that off.
Wow.
I did uh, preschool for 3 years, fourth and fifth grade for a year, then high school for 2 years, all at the same school. Then I had this opportunity to go to the Hiroshima International School, where I had a class of fifth through ninth graders. That was the one age that I hadn't taught before. And by the end of those 3 years, I felt like I really understand the child's mind. And that was important to me. And interestingly enough, when you're teaching like 7-year-olds, um, all your memories of being 7 will come back because they're like
Ah.
ciphers. So if you're ever
Oh.
wondering sort of, God, I don't remember much about being 8 to 10, go hang out with an 8 to 10-year-old, and
Mhm.
your
It's good
memories
advice.
start coming back. Yeah,
Mm.
which is, of
Yeah.
course, part of the gift that future generations give us. So that's
Speak
how, yeah. And
No, go
so I
ahead.
can get into Hiroshima if you want, but
Well, I want to take a
I'll
pause for
pause.
a moment because Hiroshima is going to get into a whole nother edge. But first of all, you talk about the importance of the body and biology, and I love your phrase "body ecology of systems theory." We're integrating the body. We integrate the body. We have an embodied spiritual practice, so we're always cued to that. And the biological documents, in terms of almost our lived experience, isn't it? So I just love that phrase. And it's interesting to me that, just as we have done and so many in our audience have done, those most revelatory moments, those most sacred mysteries that we encounter spontaneously really can set your stage, right? And be the talismans and the hallmarks and the come hithers on the road, of our life. And so I appreciate hearing that, the turning points of view. And what's also interesting is that those revelations seem to come through. And I think that also leads to the leading edge. And that gives us the leading edge. Those moments, hey, we're all connected. This is one universe. This is one petri dish that we're living in. We can't be healthy unless everything's healthy. I
Mhm.
mean, those are spiritual awakenings that now have become the cutting edge in science, I think, are leading it. Do you want to comment on that? So you were right there.
Well, in terms of how these things happen in the individual's experience, I will say they hardly ever happen without being preceded in some way by a dark night of the soul, a depression, some
Yeah.
a bad accident, because it takes that kind of suffering to break you out of the habitual patterns of the ego. But
Yeah.
once the ego has been relativized, which again is easy to say and difficult to do, um, then you have access to what Jung would call the greater self, the deep unconscious. Goes by different names in different traditions, yeah, but everybody's describing the same thing. This becomes available to you, and So the question is, well, what's coming up from the depths when we then have access to it?
Mhm. Right.
Because mostly we don't, and then we do, and then
And then what do you do with it?
we
Yeah.
consider it a revelation when it happens. But I want to make the point that the nature of that revelation is actually the voice of the earth speaking to us,
Thank you.
compensate for the
Mhm.
one-sided attitudes that we've taken towards nature.
Mm.
So all of those revelations these days are all about getting out of this destructive worldview that we're all in and getting into this other worldview in which, the heart is a primary mode of perception.
Yeah.
Web of life is the prime value. They're all
Winning
versions.
at all costs. Yeah. All of it.
They're all versions of the earth healing itself
I
through
I
us.
I I so agree with you. I used to think as a kid, like, where's Mother Earth? Where's her hand to discipline us and teach us a lesson? It is. It's here. It's it's in all of it,
It's built in.
isn't
Yeah.
it? It's built in. Thank you.
Yeah.
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 Well, if you want to look for the mother's stern hand, just look at what's happening right now.
Right.
Exactly.
That's her
And it's
stern
done
hand.
with love. That's like the tough love being meted out because we need it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one could say that the um, apocalyptic terror of our present circumstances, things look really, really dark.
Yeah.
What I call extinction anxiety, that extinction anxiety is the wake-up call.
Mm.
Thank you.
I'm
So,
reminded as you say that, I'm reminded that when
Yeah.
the Twin Towers were hit, afterwards there was this documentation how the people of New York City all of a sudden looked each other in the eyes and said good morning and hello and stuff. There was an energy shift in terms of
yeah,
how people felt connected to each other. It's kind of dissolved again, but from that period of
That
time
happened
that
in the pandemic as well.
in the pandemic,
Yeah.
yeah. But that was a specific moment that when the crisis hits, all of a sudden, like you said before, somehow the ego gets set aside. It takes something very dramatic sometimes to make that shift. Of course, there's a lot of research on the near-death experience, but that's more the extreme example. But even just day to day, even transcending our own lives by travel, by getting outside of our own norm, and all of a sudden saying, "Wait a minute, the world's not everything that I thought it was." You know, it's part of
yeah.
that shift.
Well, there's kind of a stern principle in therapy as well. Somebody comes in and they're complaining about their life and this and that and all what's happening in the collective and like that. Well, why don't you do this and this and this? Well, and they have all these rationalizations why they can't do that.
Right.
So they're just
Too
basically stuck.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
And and at some point, the tough love move is to just say, you know what? I think you just haven't suffered enough.
Mm.
Keep
If you
going the way you're going, and you'll
suffer
find it.
more,
Yeah.
then you'll make the move. And
Mhm.
that's what's happening to the collective around the globe right now. I mean, there's suffering everywhere, but the people who are making the decisions haven't suffered enough.
Mm.
And it will take, unfortunately, I think, 9/11, you would have thought that was an opportunity right there. Yeah, the heart
Right.
was open, people were loving. It got co-opted by war, right?
Mm.
Let's take all this energy that's now being released and move it towards the Middle East war. The energy is
Yes.
always craftily gathered and redirected in the interests of
The
the
few.
ego.
Yeah.
The ego.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
waiting. I mean, I tend to have a vivid imagination around nuclear war. I've read several, like Barry McCaffrey, the general. He says sometime in the next 10 years, there's going to be a nuclear weapon go off. That might do it. I don't know. The global warming is getting bad every summer. That might do it. But I have a feeling that humanity, despite the suffering that's happened, hasn't suffered enough in the right places.
Mm.
So, and our work now, as people who are somewhat aware of all this going on, is to hold that tension,
Mm.
hold that tension of opposites and
Hold the
wait for that,
candle.
wait for that third healing principle that none of us have any idea what it's going to be. That's going to pop out at some point. And our
Oh,
job,
okay. The third healing principle. None of us have any idea what it's going to be. Give us a little background on that one from your vast
well,
experience in this.
well, it's sort of it's a principle in Jungian psychology called the transcendent function that, the ego will have an opinion about something, the thesis, and then pretty soon that thesis is going to generate the antithesis. So now you're in opposites. Classic is American political parties, the thesis and antithesis, and they're always going at it like this. And this is what's happening everywhere in so many different places. And the job of the conscious individual is to hold that tension of opposites. Don't get into one or the other. I know it's hard for me speaking politically, very difficult for me to pass over with sympathetic understanding into the MAGA crowd, but I know that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I do know family members who are MAGA people, and I know them to be good people. Like, I can't just condemn them, because now if I just condemn them, I'm just coming from this position over here. I have to spend the time understanding why they think that way. So I have to have compassion for that. If I have compassion for both positions and hold that tension of opposites, and the classic image that Jung keeps talking about, holding the tension of opposites, is Christ on the cross, because that's what it feels like, that you're being crucified.
Mhm.
But you hold that tension of opposites, and at some point, a third position, so this third position will constellate, and that's the healing moment. Well, of course, what happens is this healing moment will, over, who knows, hundreds of years maybe, constellate its opposite, and then out of that, a third position will have to happen. And so
Okay,
that,
so it's a constant evolution.
yeah.
Yeah, as things are.
And I
Oh
think
boy.
that the third position, there are some hints. I say that you don't really know what it is until it's there, but it will have something to do with this new mythology of human beings being a part of the earth herself, that we
Mhm.
are the conscious um, mind of the earth herself. We're the witness of that creation. And, Brian Swimm's uh, journey of the universe story is the new myth of our time. I do think that there are the beginnings of the shape of that third healing
And
position.
that's why you were at the conference
Yeah,
recently where we met you.
yeah,
Indeed, that's why Brian Swim and Monica DeBras both have been on talking with us about this. And actually, I just have to say again that the 30 years that we've been doing this practice of ritual body postures, in a ritual setting, that kind of wisdom has been coming through for a very long time. It's
yeah,
startling. I'm making a chart of, yeah, this is what we see in our experiences. This is this new mythology. It's bubbling up all over. I agree it's the new myth for our time, and it has to be. And
Yeah,
science is supporting it. Our experience is supporting it. That's exciting to be on that leading edge, to be part of the ushering in
yeah.
of this. Can you explain where how you got to Jung and then what you see in this new story of the universe and our place in it? We are 14 billion years old. I love that already.
mhm,
Yeah, it took a long time of evolution to bring us right here, this moment. What's next? Where are we going? It gives us a sense of direction. It gives us a sense of majesty, power, responsibility. Um, yeah, and global, cosmic level. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I do think coming out of the 60s, that there were many seeds planted for the new myth. Um, and but it got co-opted in so many different ways. But rather than people giving up, they just went underground, you know.
Ah,
And the parallel is the way in which in the medieval world the church became the power power hungry surface of things, and esoteric Christianity went underground, and emerged in alchemy and Rosicrucianism and these more
The
mystical
Cathars, yeah.
Cathars. Yeah, exactly. I saw you had a speaker on the Cathar heresy and the time when Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival was written. What an amazing time that was. And at the same time, 1 million people killed in southern France, Christian against Christian.
Over this.
Don't get me
Yeah,
started. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
point is that in the 70s, these little pockets have dispersed, and they've been growing and getting more aware. And with just the right kind of political leadership, they're just going to pop up. So we're waiting for that to happen.
They're not
And
going away.
not going away.
They're
Exactly.
too true. They're too emblematic of how the universe works and where it's going.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're in alignment with Earth processes, and
Yes.
anything that's not is going to be cast off.
And life processes, right? And the myths are expression of this.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of a new cosmology and how that integrates into us personally. We don't want it to be a theoretical discussion that's talking about something outside of ourselves. We need to look at ourselves directly in our relationship to all of it. I'm constantly, we started a program here at our institute just looking at global collective consciousness, and by one of our advisors, Brian Tucker, and we're looking at how there are worldwide organizations that are trying to take on this concept of consciousness, how it integrates into the world, and what it can do as we go forth. Like you said before, it's really difficult for someone to step outside of their worldview that they grew up with. And how is that shift of consciousness going to happen? And where is the nuts and bolts of it? Not just some theoretical Pollyanna kind of view, but when we start talking about some of the concepts that Brian Swim's bringing to the table, and others, where do you see all of that integrating into us as human beings, and how can we grab the tail of this movement and be a part of it and be one of the change makers?
Oh, well, why don't you ask me a hard question? Well, let me answer that by going back to a previous question about the Jungian thing and how I got into that. Well, as I mentioned, I had these incredible dreams that I just couldn't believe that something inside of me, while I was asleep, wrote an
Mhm.
incredible dream, so relevant to who I was, and laid out all my issues. Who or what is that? Like, where does that come from? Like, it was intelligent, and yet way more intelligent than me.
I'm larger than I know. Yeah.
Well, like, to me, that's a mystery. And, I've been teaching dream stuff for, almost 50 years now. And I'll say that uh, just to have one dream, have a person just explain one, have one report, one dream. And I can make this point. Who or what wrote that? There's something inside of you that you don't understand that
Mhm.
loves you unconditionally enough to give you a picture of your inner life that, if you follow the tracks that it's laying down, will lead you to wholeness and healing.
Yeah.
Like, really? Like one dream? Yeah, exactly. Every night it happens. It's the biology of your unconscious healing you
Mhm.
unbidden. Okay,
Mhm.
so in graduate school, I had a chance to study Jung, although at that time you couldn't, believe it or not, in the mid 70s, you still couldn't write a dissertation on Jung at a mainstream
No.
university. Too much of a mystic, which is, of course, absurd
Um,
now. But anyway, but what I realized was that I uh, I didn't trust anybody, basically. I didn't trust my parents. I didn't trust my teachers, my college teachers, because they were coming out of this worldview that I thought was destroying the planet. I didn't trust the politics. It was a time of Nixon, and I didn't trust anything. And so now, what can I trust? What what can be a compass for me in my life? And I
mhm.
realized my dreams. I trust my dreams. So I said, I'm going to make my spiritual practice writing down every dream I can remember. and that was in 1974. So I've written down every dream I can
How
remember.
many are you up to now, number-wise?
Well, I have about 20 feet of notebooks over there,
Okay. All right. Good description. Yeah.
labeled by year.
Mhm.
Um, Um, and so my spiritual practice is to get up in the morning, take the little scribbles of my previous dream and my dream from that night and type into my computer. Now I used to handwrite it. Italicize the dream speech. Before I used the computer, I wrote it all in red.
Mhm.
And then I start reflecting on it. Well, I wonder why I had that dream last night. Oh, well, this figure, and then, oh, whoa, I never thought about that before. And that's the most common feeling you have. Geez, I never thought about that before. Exactly, because you were unconscious.
Mhm.
And the
But
dream
that's
is
a good place to be. That's where this stuff can get downloaded, right?
exactly,
We temporarily take our blinders off. Some other part of us gets to process with us. Yeah.
exactly. So, and all those dreams are trying to move you to remove the blocks of the energetic flow
Mhm.
that will lead to you free flowing energy of wholeness. That's where it's all, every dream is trying to get you
Mhm.
there. And
Mhm.
especially the bad ones, means you're
Oh,
not,
yeah, because there's major blocks to
you got
unravel.
it's a
Yeah.
bigger block than the other ones. Okay, so that all made sense, and I was doing it mostly in terms of me, my individual psychology, trying to make it in this world. I got married in 1976, married for 48 years now. We had two kids, five
Congrats.
kids now. Trying to make it. But as I studied things more, especially coming out of the Hiroshima experience and the work of Joanna Macy and then of Thomas Berry, I realized that,
Mm.
well, it's not just me dreaming.
Mhm.
Something is what I was calling my personal unconscious is actually a world unconscious.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that world unconscious is picking up the communication from the larger earth forces itself and moving up
Mhm.
through me and clothing it in my personal images of my personal memories and
Mhm.
and coming up into my conscious awareness by recording my dream. And I
Right.
realized that, oh, the dreams are the voice of the earth.
Ah,
Mhm.
beautiful.
Stop
And
right there. Stop right there.
Hold it.
This is so important. The voice of the earth. We say God is speaking to us. We say we have open dialogue with the universe.
Mhm.
And we do the same. Our visions seem to be just that, a dreamlike experience formulated for our elucidation, our insight, our emotional shift and resolution, our healing. Exactly. There's so many ways for it to come across the stage of your inner screen and emotional. But and we say ancestors, but what we're realizing is all of its ancestors.
Yeah.
Earth, we're stardust. The stars are our ancestors. I mean, and so we go to Brian Swim and Monica, and it's like, oh yes, we can say that literally. It's not just a metaphor, it's literal. I
Mhm.
love that.
Yeah.
And so it's just so beautiful, isn't it? It just gives you such hope and
And tremendous
connectivity and community.
meaning. Every life is
Yeah,
incredibly meaningful. Like
Mm.
you've been sent here with a message from the
Yeah.
earth herself, and your
yeah.
job is to open the conduits so that you can become an agent for the voice of the earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Every
you. Yeah.
individual has
We were
cosmic.
liaisons between the earth and the heavens. We
Yeah.
get that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And ritual is one way of stirring the pot, right? And implementing this energy flow.
Yeah. So in a lecture I gave last year on dreams, rituals, and the dark night of the species soul, I talk about dreams as your compass. It will guide you, and rituals as anchors. Anchoring the community in which you live, and grounding it in terms of earth principles. Um,
Yeah.
and I really think that's important that we be doing more ritual. We need a lot more grief rituals, and we
Mhm.
need a lot more solidarity rituals in particular, I would say.
Mm.
I want to make one point, getting back to the Hiroshima stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's relevant here, which is that You know, when I was in Hiroshima and reading Jonathan Schell's book, The Fate of the Earth, which is still one of the best books on nuclear war, um,
Oh,
I
okay.
became aware of several things uh, as a result of immersing myself in the terror of Hiroshima.
Mm.
And the terror of Hiroshima is that a bomb uh, killed 120,000 people um, in an instant. And
Mhm.
uh, it's now the size of a tactical nuclear weapon. So the Hiroshima bomb is now considered a tactical. It's like
A minor bomb. Yeah.
40 kilotons, you know, and now, you know, the standard nuclear weapon is 1 megaton, and the Russians have set off a 50 megaton bomb. So we're talking, you know, scale here. So, but in Hiroshima, I realized that, well, humans now have the opportunity at a push of a button
Mhm.
to annihilate not only all humans, but most, not all, life on Earth. And uh, so when you start imagining, well, what is the Earth like if humans go extinct?
Worked here.
If, and so they now go extinct. And of course, you can see a lot of apocalyptic films and stuff like trying to imagine,
Mhm.
but there's always a human around, right? Because otherwise you don't have a story, right? Humans are necessary for story to happen. But
Yeah.
once you realize what happens when all humanity is gone, it's like a fish realizing that it's swimming in water. You know, you if you imagine that, then you realize, well, humans have this cosmic role to play
Mhm.
of being the Earth's self-consciousness.
Yeah.
So when a human being is looking through a telescope and realizing that there's actually this 1920 at Hubble, realizing there's actually another galaxy besides ours,
Other worlds.
that's the Earth
Yeah.
itself now becoming aware of its place in the cosmos. Well, it turns out
Mhm.
there's not just one, there's actually billions of other galaxies, but that's another mind-blowing thing that we're all having to carry that awareness now. But
Mhm.
point is that the value of imagining nuclear war is that it wakes you up to the gifts of
Ah,
human consciousness.
absolutely.
And what we're poised to lose if we
Right,
don't wake up to
right.
that
And how
gift,
and how the
utilize
earth,
that gift.
of
Yeah.
course, is going to go that so humans don't work apparently in this scenario, and so she's going to take a different path, right? And over the next
Yeah, look at her extinction record. She's had a lot of experimentation, advance.
99.999% of the
Yeah.
species that ever lived are extinct.
Mm.
And we've
So
been hastening those as well. I mean, to me, it's not just the big threats of annihilation that we all know, but it's just our activities are wiping out landscapes and ecosystems, and those species are just disappearing without much recognition. I mean,
yeah,
it seems like we just a wake of destruction that
yeah.
we walk. Yeah.
And there's that lack of connectedness, but
Yeah.
continue,
But
right?
if we wake up to that process of extinction,
Right.
Yeah.
not shy away from it, not go into denial, but
Right.
actually do the grief work that's
Mm.
Mhm.
required to deal with
Mhm.
that situation, then you find yourself loving life, loving
Yes, thank
your
you.
family, loving yourself more and more and more because of the grief. Now, there's one other thing, key insight coming out of Hiroshima. So one is becoming aware of the consciousness and the role of the human in evolution. But the second is realizing that if humans go extinct, future generations will not be born,
Mhm.
which means that future generations have been supporting us all along because they have a great interest in having their opportunity to be
Mhm.
incarnated on the earth,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So by not pushing the button and by being on the side of forces that are assisting in the process of not pushing the button, you're in partnership with future generations. You know,
Mhm.
you're
That's
doing
a
a
beautiful thought,
contribution
isn't it?
for future generations. And
Mhm.
so So nuclear war and any threat to human extinction begins to make you hyper aware of the ancestor, currently living, future
And
being
futures.
spectrum
Yeah.
of humanity as a whole. And
Well, and also the past ancestors, I mean, they survived. That's why we're here.
yeah,
They survived. They had their own threats of annihilation multiple times as well. I just want to say that
Just to
you
add to that,
mentioned the species soul. This is the dark night. You call it of the species soul. Paul calls it a collective soul because we're all in it together. But tell me about this species, the human species. Do
yeah.
other species, you
Well,
know?
that's the biologist in me, collective
Okay.
soul is another kind of an equivalent thing. But I'm interested in the extinction or lack thereof of the human species, right?
right?
Yeah.
And so that's a biological term, right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
my undergraduate degree is in biology.
But
But
I guess I just want to say that there's so many stakeholders in this game, and it's not just us humans. We have to realize that, hey, it's time for us to become responsible members of the web of life. We have such great influence. We're in a web of life. It's not just about us. That's
right.
part of the collective awakening, though.
It's
Yeah.
true, but it's also true that humans now are the largest geological force on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Geological force.
Yeah, we move
We're
mountains, don't we?
changing the
The
atmosphere, we're changing
landscape.
the landscape, everything. We're a geological force. And so one way of thinking about this theologically is that it used to be thought that um, the world will end through an act of a theistic God or something. But now we realize that humans
Us.
have humanized the eschaton. That is, humans are now in charge of the end of the earth.
Oh,
And
yeah.
our decision making, these little egos right here, our collective decision making
Mhm.
is going to determine the fate of the earth.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
We need to
Let's
wake up to that responsibility.
That's a perfect time to say, let's take audience questions, comments, raise your hand, open up your mic.
Yeah, we'll take some questions, but I do obviously can't skip over the
Oh yeah,
impact
your
of,
questions are.
well, the question I was coming is the AI question.
Oh yeah,
Because
thank
the
you.
AI thing now, all of a sudden, we're putting our intelligence in the hands that goes even beyond just that instinctive soul
Human
aspect of
intelligence, and now we're giving it
that
to something we
instinctive
built.
that
Yeah.
instinctive human intelligence, as you're referring to, within ourselves, that we kind of guide ourselves. There's a guidance system built into us that's not going to ever be a part of the AI world.
Well
And
put.
the more that we put ourselves out there, the more we don't have the steering wheel as much as we go forth. So that's a concern. I
You're
think
right.
that's
There's
an
another hand on the steering wheel. Yeah.
tremendous, incredibly powerful tool that's going to change the world. And there's all kinds of positive aspects to it on the level of humanity and health and everything else. But the other flip side of it, we don't know what that's going to mean.
Right. So it was explained to us that the algorithms now run the AI are now built by AI. And so humans don't really know the code sequence. We can't really go in there and correct anything. It's the
That's
cat's out of the bag and it's running wild.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's an equivalent to the nuclear anxiety we're feeling. Yeah,
Yeah, turns out that the Terminator mythology is not so far off,
right.
right? There are stories about this, and the how to navigate within those terrors, like the terror of AI, is contained in our mythologies, and get you can get guidance and solace from looking at the mythologies around this. I would just say that one thing that AI is doing, even in your description of it, it's a very abstract description. Oh, algorithms and this and that and the other, which is very different from me. Spending the day with my grandson, you know, or throwing a party for my friends, or loving this or loving that. So, really what we need to do in addition to paying attention to this whole AI thing, yes, 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 all that important, yes, yes, but
What
the
story is it telling?
balance it is to be in the now, to pay attention to your relationships, to pay attention to your dreams, to be in the
Mhm.
presence of uh, kind of soulful things. That's the antidote to AI. I'm not saying ignore it or anything like that. I'm just saying make sure you don't forget that side of things. And if you do, you'll be grounded as you approach the question of AI.
You asked about upcoming guests, and Thomas Riccio, who uses ritual postures in his theater work and has been part of
Traveling the
the
world with ritual.
with indigenous cultures.
Right.
And he is coming back in August, and
Okay.
he's going to talk to us about Sophia, a very sophisticated, very beautiful female robot that he's been working with and helping to write the narrative of her story. And so he's long been bridging the gap between human avatar, robot avatar, and this dialogue. So
Mm.
that's going to be an interesting conversation. Yeah. Oh my. Oh,
Let's go
David
to
Hicks.
David. Would you like to, there you are.
Hi there. So I was wondering, well, Randy, I'm a Antioch graduate from
Oh,
GMP 98.
all right.
So I was wondering if you were familiar with Immanuel Velikovsky's work. Um, so he's known for Ages in Chaos, Worlds in Collision, and his basic premise was that our solar system isn't as stable as we think, and that that a lot of the flood stories and the parting of the Red Sea and that kind of stuff was caused by planetary effects. And he was a psychologist, and he wrote a book called Mankind in Amnesia and described how these catastrophic worldwide events created a amnesia in our species that are reflected in scriptures by these what we would consider crazy descriptions of mountains collapsing and so forth, when in fact he says that it's probably what they actually saw. I associate that with your dream imagery and stuff. And
Mhm.
but if you're not familiar with it, then I guess you can't comment on that.
Well, I
No,
appreciate the catastrophe angle of it because, as Monica DeBras Bowles often points out, hey, catastrophe is just part of the cosmos. It catastrophe is how part of how it grows. But Randy,
yeah, well, yeah, I agree along those lines. I mean, I don't have to know the details of what he's saying to recognize apocalyptic imagery. And, you know, apocalypse is a kind of archetype within the human psyche, the collective psyche, and therefore in our individual psyches. And because people have been in villages that have been wiped out, there's been a lot of wiping out of large
tsunamis come.
populations,
Yeah.
terrible, a third of the population dead in Europe from the bubonic plague. I mean, those kinds of things. So the human body has responded to those things over hundreds of thousands of years, and there is this archetype of apocalypse that when it gets constellated by evidence of apocalypse around us, begins to not only constellate fear, but also the wisdom that's contained within those archetypal patterns.
Oh,
So I would see, and again, I don't know anything about this particular
Velikovsky.
thinker,
Yeah.
but I recognize the presence of the apocalyptic archetype in it. And
Yeah.
the important thing to remember about apocalypse is that it comes from the root word to reveal. And
oh,
the image is of a curtain being pulled aside, you know.
oh,
So
wow.
it's never the end of everything. It's the end of a certain thing and the beginning of something else. So I often use this phrase about we're hospicing the old world while we're midwifing the new world at the
Oh,
same.
that's a beautiful phrase. I like that.
That means that that when you feel that to be true, you're in the middle of the apocalyptic archetype.
Yeah.
Wow.
I guess the main point that I forgot to mention with Velikovsky was he felt that from his study of amnesia that people with amnesia try to recreate what it was that caused the amnesia to start with, and so he tied that in with nuclear war and so forth, and that we were kind of on a self-destruct course caused by these global events that happened in thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and so it's happening again, and we see evidence of it everywhere. And I think it's a harbinger of the new world trying to be born. And apparently, we
Yeah.
haven't suffered enough to let the old world go. And so we're in for even worse things. But it doesn't mean that we can't have joy with the gift of being alive and realizing that this generation right now that's conscious and making decisions about it are living the most valuable lives ever lived by human beings.
Wow. Yeah.
How
This
do you mean
generation,
that? The most valuable lives. How do you mean that?
well, while there have been terrible things, as Velikovsky, if that's his name, if I pronounced it right, is saying, none of them have had the potential to wipe out the entire human species, right?
Okay.
We're now engaged in processes that have the potential to wipe out the entire human species, like the notion of the button for nuclear war. And
Mhm.
I've often said that, you know, I would bet 150 years from now, assuming everything goes okay, that they'll have calendars that start with the year 1945. Because
Mhm.
1945 and the advent of the nuclear age is the beginning of an entire new consciousness because humans are now aware that they can eliminate life on Earth. And that
And
was
be
not,
annihilated like that.
Right.
Do
you can
by our
have,
own doing. It's not an asteroid coming and hitting us.
yeah.
It's us creating it
We have the
and
button.
pushing a button.
We have a button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
had archetypal patterns that were shaped in the Neolithic era, you know, tens of thousands of
Yeah.
years ago, and yet we're being faced with questions about AI and, you know, stuff that our biological makeup just can't even, you know, wasn't designed to deal with forces like that, right?
Yeah.
So, so now
We have
we're
some growing
having to
up
deal
to
with
do
that.
in a hurry. Yeah.
And the decisions that we make are going to determine the fate of the earth. Well, that hasn't been true in the past for human beings prior
Right.
to 1945. So I think 1945 is a pivot year
Mhm.
for a new consciousness.
Wow,
Thank you. Thank you,
fascinating.
David. Yeah.
Good questions there to pose.
Josh is up next. I'm gonna have Josh come on.
I just want to say one thing though. While the universe, while the cosmos has its cataclysms, that's how we have heavy elements. That's how come we have bodies and matter to create life, right? The death throes of a star. They've also found a recent meteorite that was so freshly dropped that they analyzed it. Oh, there's water. There's water in this meteorite. So it's this beautiful image of the cosmos just raining down the water of life from above. Or when we talked with Chandra Wickramasinghe, a colleague of Fred Hoyle, they talked about panspermia. Oh, the codes of life just jettison in a comet and gently drop down to earth and take root. You know, it's just the order and chaos, right? And that
Order
continual
chaos
dance.
as opposites, out of which comes the third position. Yep.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Hey, Josh, our recent guest, back to participate in this one. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And Randy, thank you so much for that wonderful perspective. A point I wanted to bring up, and I suspect you mentioning grandkids that you may share a lot of this perspective. It's been really eye-opening for me to talk to my children who are young adults about their experience with the angst of the dangers of the world that we live in. And it occurs to me that there's something very similar to me having grown up in the 70s and 80s with the fear of nuclear war hanging over my head, versus the plethora of issues that they worry about.
Mm.
And it seems that not only they, but many of their friends have a pretty fatalistic attitude. Whereas I don't recall that nearly as much when I was growing up. And my curiosity about that has led me to the belief that a lot of that is around the institutions that we have as a society and our faith in them. And certainly, I don't think that it would be glorifying things to say that in the 70s and 80s that we had profound faith in all of our government and other institutions. But it seems to me that we had a lot more faith back then than especially young people do now. And so I'm curious about your perspective about it. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is in an odd way, sort of a sense of hope. In my work in working with communities on positive change, It certainly has been my experience that when things are bad, people are most likely to dig deep and make radical change in their lives, in their communities. And I believe that, especially among younger people, that looking at all of the risks that they face, combined with having very little faith in institutions to do anything about it, has created a form of suffering that we see in
Um,
widespread mental health issues, um, in that come from, I think, not only that, but the exhaustion from a relentless triggering of anxiety in everything that kids experience these days.
oh, wow.
And so I actually not only share your perspective, but a sense of hope about the fact that that suffering opens up the possibility of people seeing, hey, maybe there's a different way to go. So anyway, I've dumped a couple of things, but Randy, I'd love to hear your perspective on those.
Oh, good
Yeah.
questions, Josh. Thanks.
Well, what occurs to me is an imagination. So you don't necessarily need to believe this literally, but I would just say that there are stories of people lining up in the spirit world to be incarnated at this particular time. As I said, this is a particularly pregnant time for the human species. And there are people lining up to be incarnated. Well, really? They want to be born at this time.
Hmm.
Well, then they're born and they get around this really depressing situation, right, in their youth. And they go like, and those cognitive structures get built around it, you know. But what about the resources that they were born with? That's their destiny, that's in their body from the beginning, that is the wisdom that they were born with. So, how can you liberate that in the midst of all this dark news around them? And
Mhm.
that's why I'm really involved with Youth Rites of Passage. And I'm the president emeritus of a Youth Rites of Passage organization, Rite of Passage Journeys. And my 13-year-old granddaughter is out on quest right now, a 3-week backpacking trip through the Olympic Peninsula. Then we picked them up and put them on the Washington Pacific coast, where she did a 24-hour vision fast, right? No food, just to keep a little fire going for the 24 hours at the age of 13. I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think she's going to come back a beast, like a warrior, right? And so, uh, uh, to me, that's part of our work right now. Rather than um, uh, talking to them about how bad everything is, or like let's agree things are bad, but put it in a ritual context where they
Right.
have an intense encounter with that, and in the midst of that intense encounter, discover the gifts that they were born with, that they're bringing into the world. And then when they come back, mirror those gifts back to them again and again and again through ritual, community ritual, and let them realize they're a child of the frickin' universe. And what a great time to be alive, because look at all the things that I can do in the midst of all this suffering.
Generation,
Go ahead.
a generation of warriors. But you flip the conversation the other direction, which is a fantastic perspective to say that they come into this challenging time with the opportunity to be the warriors that make the shift and the changes that need to happen.
And the solutionaries, because when the old methods no longer work, that's when the new ones have an opportunity to arise, right? The dinosaurs had to die out before mammals could gain their foothold.
That's interesting. That's an interesting change.
Clean a slate once
And I
in a
want to
while.
point out that what's required to see things that way is an understanding of what a human being is that's different than the one we were raised in.
Hmm.
Because we were
Yeah.
raised with a human image of a blank slate, right? Where, you're born a blank slate and then the environment shapes you in all these different ways, right? Well, it's another notion of what a human being is to say that you're in fact born with an image of who you are from the very beginning. It's a much more
Mhm.
mythic understanding of what human beings are. By the way, the best proponent of this is the mythologist Michael Meade. Anyway, it's a different human image. Well, when we start doing Vision Quest work, and I was a Vision Quest guide for many years with adults, you can see these inner gifts starting to be discovered for the first time, and the surge of energy that it brings with it. You know, people being depressed, which after all is depression is a form of your life energy being down in the unconscious, not available to you. But when that is liberated, there's this surge of agency and purpose and meaning. And that's what we need to be bringing to the youth of our world right now.
I appreciate that early cultures had these institutions, these rituals, the guides. They set aside time. They had these means to send people out on a vision quest. But in my experience, the dark night of the soul is going to come visit you when you need it. And it's all you can do to just hang on for the ride. And I agree with you because my biggest dark night of the soul happened actually when you were out of town.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and everything just came crashing down, and I knew that it was going to be easier to change than to stay the same. It was going to be more comfortable to change. I had no choice. My back was up against the wall, and it was liberating. It was physical, right? It was just a much energy running through you. It's like your brain's exploding. It's you lose you're just willing to set aside, you're just jettisoning all sorts of bad. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And there are various practices to do. I had this one. I had ritual body press. All I did was this. That's all I could do. It saved my soul. So whatever your technique is to look inside and bring it up to the subconscious or up to the conscious mind and deal with it, and to bring in the spirits, the mentors, the guides, the larger sphere that you were describing earlier, that's accessible to all of us. Yeah, we can ride this out. And I think that each of us are tasked with finding our way through this in a society that has not supported it.
Right.
And that's why all these other formulas, practices, institutions are arising, because we need them, because they've always been with us. And it's exciting time, from the Eleusinian mysteries to now, to the Ice Age rituals to now. I mean, this is part of the journey of being human.
Right.
This is how we interact with this sphere. There's so many ways of doing it. So I appreciate this.
You brought
But
a good
sending a
point.
13-year-old out in a guided way to do that and structure it, hallelujah for those kids. But it will meet up with you sooner or later. And I just feel sorry for people who don't recognize it, don't know it, and then suppress it, because I've seen those stories too.
More often than
But
not,
just
yeah.
go through it. The other thing was my parents dying and being with both of them for months and months, when everything else falls away, but the love and the send off and grace and beauty. That's another moment that it can be.
You can,
Yeah.
But, you know,
So here's to the dark night of the soul and
yeah.
finding our way through.
Go ahead, Randy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
in an intact culture, you know, both of your stories are things that you had to do pretty much on your own.
Yeah.
Intact culture, there are ritual communities where you can go and these things are recognized. You know,
As
we've
part,
done
yeah.
these 2-day grief rituals, you know, where
Right.
you know there's this drumming and people are wailing and screaming and doing all this kind of, and it's okay, like the more the better, you know, and wailing and beating on things. Yeah, highly ritualized, you know, altar, you know, preparation. I don't want to give a too superficial a view of these grief ritual, but they're extremely intense.
Yeah.
And but comes a time, and this is what Stan Groff and Rick Tarnas discovered in psychedelic therapy, that one of the great values of psychedelic therapy is that it liberates the energies that have been repressed, and you're in a safe environment and you can just let go with whatever comes out, you know, finally expressed, finally, whether it's anger, crying, or whatever, you know, and then the way that Rick talks about it, he says, the full expression of an emotion is the death of that emotion.
Mm.
So people working through their traumatic experience,
Resolution.
reliving it, they're re-experiencing it in the body, and then
It's spent, right?
they're-
It's decharged. It's
and
been
now
detonated.
that block to the
Mhm.
free flow of energy has been removed, And now the energy can flow in a new way. And
Well,
that's
describe how this could happen on a collective level. If all of humanity is coming to the point, to the pain point, where we must change, we see we must change, we lay down all the baggage and the arms and the diatribe and the, what does it look like? And it's so interesting that you're here, Josh, again with us, because this is what you do in communities that are in crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
And
And to touch on that a little bit, I would actually argue that while we should certainly aspire to have this be a fully collective experience, I also feel like it's something that needs the catalyst,
mhm,
where enough
as
of it's
Randy was saying.
happening that it's visible and draws others in. And in my experience, the fundamental aspect of that is connection. And again, this is why I have some optimism in seeing how isolated we are right now, is because it's my very strong sense that there's this incredible thirst for connection. And so giving people that experience, whatever we can do to be able to provide experience to individual others to connect, is a way to be able to make that spark that will eventually turn into that catalyst that will really create the wave of change.
great. Well, if I can add one more piece to that. So, yeah, I'm involved in these 3 nonprofits that are part of my work, co-president of the Seattle Jung Society and with Rite of Passage Journeys. But the other one I'm involved with is called Saging International. And it's about spiritual eldering for the 21st century. And and so it was a way of taking my interest in rites of passage and applying it to people who are aging and understanding their role and what is the processes that people who are aging need to go through so that they can be good ancestors for the future. And, um,
Yeah.
well, what we're involved in is creating wisdom circles. That is, groups of 10 to 12 older people who get together on a Zoom call or in person, ideally, um, and discuss issues of aging. And
Mhm.
this is a microcosm of what my mentor Joanna Macy talked about. That at this time we need to be forming what she called rough weather networks. We're we're in the midst
Prepare
of rough
to
weather, right?
sail through the
So,
rough weather, yeah.
so the notion that any one of us can change the trajectory of what's going on
No.
it's just too big,
Mm.
but we can hold up our little piece of the sky. And what if we took the responsibility to form a little circle, much like you all have done in this series right here? You're forming a rough weather network where people can go and talk about things that are like troubling them. And, let's talk about the extinction of the human species and, all this kind of, right. We are a rough weather network. And I like the way that Rick Tarnas talks about it when he talks about heroic communities. He said, heroic communities like this one that we're involved in right now, or the Jung Society, or Rite of Passage Journeys, or Sage, these are heroic communities who have a vision of the good, understood as the archetypal good, a vision of the good that is in contrast to the mainstream culture.
Yeah.
So I think forming these wisdom circles, these rough weather networks, call them what you will, are absolutely essential at this time for both support and to stimulate new thoughts and
Yes,
be in alignment with the will of the earth, which is moving towards wholeness.
that's it. I mean, that's part of the whole thing of global
Yeah.
collective consciousness. We want to be one of the
Yeah.
drops in the ocean, making a change, being a part of something greater than ourselves. Yeah.
Please.
How are you, as a policy, you help usher in new policies? How are you integrating all of this as a scientist? You're a marine biologist. How are you taking all of this and infiltrating it into some of these divisive communities and their decisions and their policies to come? How do you do it?
Yeah, wonderful question. To give a quick answer, and it very much ties into this idea of rough weather societies.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
that from a sort of strictly spiritual or otherwise view of psychology, that we have 2 fundamental ways of addressing the world. One is a fear response where we want to fight or flight, where we want to isolate ourselves. The other one is this is wanting to connect and do so with just a great deal of empathy. So a huge part of my process is creating the right environments where people can feel seen and heard, where we can start to build trust, and where that gets to a point where the switch flips, the
Mhm.
from that fight or flight mentality to the let's figure this out together. And it's such a beautiful thing to watch. But interestingly, what really seems to help with that is the idea of essentially preparing for something that could be coming up in the future, where we want to have our ducks in order so that when that comes about, we feel confident
More
enough in each other that
resilience.
we can actually work together to move through that. And so again, a big part of my system is actually a whole series of some very technical, some that are much more in just the sort of social psychology of creating a collective trust in a system that we have built together, aka the policy, to move us forward in a way that's a process, not just a this is the answer. And in fact, my favorite part of my job is when I get to do that with communities, watch that change happen, watch them take charge of everything and just move way beyond where I could have ever even anticipated where they would go. And it's beautiful, not only because they come up with really good policy ideas, but it's beautiful because that community is now like just a wonderful
Working
group of people.
together.
They're a
Yeah.
rough weather society. Yes.
Right.
I wanted to ask you also, Randy, so what is the myth? What is the archetype? What is the psychology behind when we read about certain technocrats who are spending $230 million to go buy an island in Hawaii, and they're just making it one big deluxe bunker? And, I'm thinking, why not take that same funds, go take a Hawaiian island that you can buy and say, hey, let's start planting food crops, because when the boats stop coming, y'all are going to starve if you don't have food in the ground. Let's start
Hawaii.
cleaning it up and stop Monsanto from desecrating with all the chemicals. Let's get the fisheries back as the Hawaiians did. I mean, we were swimming among some of the old fish pools. The fish come in, they grow fat, they can't get out. Hey, scoop them up. Why not build a community that's resilient? Because if you're down there in your little bunker, you're going to be a little bit lonely, right?
This is the
With all of
shift.
this, but isn't there joy and community and happy children and happy faces and being a sanctuary and pulling together and dancing and singing and finding some joy in that? I just like, hello. And then I was talking with one woman, and we were talking about, well, it's going to be inevitable at some point in our future, even if it's the sun blowing up and becoming the red dwarf, whatever, and she said, well, yeah, when it all comes down, I do have a solution. I do have my own escape hash: death. She goes, I just don't want to be here for it. But what about those kids who now have the chance to build the world you want to build? Let us help. We have a little bit of wisdom, right? We have a few more decades on the planet. Yeah, I mean, so I just don't get the psychology of, or as Tony Hall, is Tony here today?
Yeah, he left.
Tony, what about the people that are building the next spaceship so they can colonize the next planet and leave the rest of us behind? And Tony's response was, yeah, just try it. Yeah, just try to go be with this body on gravity on Mars. Just try the 100 years it's going to take to even do a 10th of the terraforming necessary. And look at every pioneer in history. It's a hard scrabble life, no matter how many
Earth
billions
is our
you
best
have.
bet. Yeah.
Yeah, how about fixing here?
Okay.
I just want to talk to a Jungian about this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, okay. So, much as I totally identify with your feelings, I want to suggest that in framing it that way, you are in the process of othering. And so what I want to point out is this, that there's us over here, and then there's all these idiots over here, which
Rich
means
idiots,
that,
but idiots, right?
yeah, which
Yeah.
means that you're not sustaining the tension of the opposites. So how could you do that with a rich person doing a bunker where that money could be used so much someplace else? Well, it's all about compassion. So instead of othering, which is because of a split happening in your own mind and you're projecting onto these other people your own shadow stuff. Sorry, that's Jungian talk there.
Okay. Yeah.
What would be required is to think about the suffering of that person where they have all this money. They could do anything in the world and they're so frightened. They are so terrified that they're
Fight
spending
or
on
flight. Yeah.
kids. And here's the thing, and this is true of the MAGA crowd as well. Those people are freaked out about everything that's happening. You
Right.
know,
The
they can
shift.
feel, I mean, they deny global warming, but that's obviously a projection as well. They know, their unconscious knows what's going on, but they can't face it. They're terrified. And so the psychological mechanism is that they can't handle that. The terror splits their consciousness. They now have them over here and this other that's causing all this terror
Oh, I
on
see.
the
Let's
side, and
pinpoint one person,
then they
all heaped
project it
downhill.
onto
Yeah.
those libs, and they hate them. They want to annihilate them. Right. The base. Okay. So to sustain the tension of opposites, you have to go into meditation and you have to pass over into the experience of these people in the Midwest or the South or wherever, they are, and understand that they're as terrified as you are about the future of this planet. And
Right.
this is their response to it. Now you can have a little bit of compassion on it. And even though I totally disagree with everything they're saying, not everything, because what happens when you have a flat tire in Alabama? Some person's going to help you out,
Mhm.
and they're probably a MAGA Republican. They're going to help you out because you're in distress. Like, they're human beings too.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we have to get a better grasp on collective terror that is infecting everything in our culture right now.
Yeah.
This is
We,
why we're having this very conversation.
Right.
And by the way, I have friends on all sides of the political perspective, and I never talk politics, and we try not to talk it on this program because we are a nonprofit and our mandate is not to be political, right? To rise above it. So I don't talk politics, and I have friends because I value who they are,
Yeah.
they're human
regardless of what they
just like
believe.
everybody else,
So
right?
Yeah.
yeah,
I was going to ask, G put a comment in the chat room. I was going to ask, could you just come on camera instead, G, and share your thoughts after listening to this?
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. I've really enjoyed everything you've said, Randy, especially about the duality and the tangling of the web and holding these opposite sides. I put that in because I also see it as we've built all of the tools to reconnect, but they have this paradoxical effect of tearing us apart. And I actually believe that's because we don't have the latest systems online, which is that there are certain things that are missing. There's a certain, like the human shadow, we are missing a reflector for the human shadow. And we've been looking at that in films and everything, but there's actual technical things that are like our phones are fragmenting our psyches more than they're connecting us. Our monetary systems, which are the current between two banks, which are usually two people, that system is flooding everywhere. So we're placing numbers on people and putting value on people without really knowing what our current value is. So to me, there's like a big mix up, and that's why I put that comment is I truly believe there's a solution hiding in the middle.
Could you say one more time that solution? Yeah.
It's essentially like the collective third eye. Like if we've built all of the tools for the mouth, like a machine mouth that talks, the collective, we've also built the brain in a way. We've built networks for everything. There's there's like four systems missing for orientation. and we're working very linearly, but we don't have like circular spatial systems online. And so there's, yeah, it's not a simple thing to say, but there are 4 different things missing that mirror.
I have seen Xi's work, and it's a very beautiful, complex 3D model that you're building. That's really like an art piece. Um, coming
Thank
from
you.
being a Hollywood, set
Uh,
designer, painter.
No, not such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
it's
That's
beautiful to behold, and it helps to have that visual. You should come and
Thank you.
talk to us when you're ready to reveal that, and we can go into depth in it.
Yeah.
So you
Would
have that
love to.
open
Thank you.
invitation, Xi.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
I just
Follow up with that and say that I don't understand everything they're saying, but I recognize a creative impulse. And it reminds me of a very important point that Thomas Berry made. And he said, we're living in times where, our cultural guidance is not adequate to the task before us.
Mhm.
So what we need to do is we need to go back to what he calls our genetic guidance. And by that, he doesn't mean like the genes, he means going back to fundamental body, archetypal things that have never been imagined before, right? Our genetic guidance. And what I see in your project is an
Yeah.
expression of genetic guidance coming out into the earth. He calls this the dream of the earth. And if there's one piece of writing I can recommend to people, it is Thomas Berry's essay called The Dream of the Earth in his book called The Dream of the Earth. But that notion of genetic guidance, and he says, what we need is not so much transcendence, we need incendence.
Insane.
There's a
That's beautiful.
going, not a going
Going
out,
within.
associating from the body, but going more deeply into the interiority of things. And I
That's
see in
beautiful.
your project, as much as you've described it, an expression of genetic guidance. So
Yeah.
thank
Well, then
Thank you for saying that.
I want
Thank
to tell
G.
a story here, and that is that my sister Kim was describing how a movie. I have that woman in my sights to invite her about the Dalai Lama's life and how he meditates 5-6 hours a day, and he describes that meditation as I'm just sending out love. I'm taking in the dark of the world, I'm transmuting it, and I'm sending out love again. I'm thinking, gosh, that is such a natural instinct. That's part of our genetics. That comes up in meditations over and over again. It comes up in our work as a vision that you're doing. You're taking an energy, you're giving it, transmuting it, or at least being the part of the circuitry to send it to earth and vice versa. You're part of the flow. You're the hollow bone through which this works. And I was thinking, it's such a natural instinct. They're on social media, and we talked about this, but a mother posts a beautiful picture of her lovely little daughter standing on heart printed wrapping paper. So she's standing on this paper and she's sitting like this. And she's saying, she's beaming out. And her mother goes, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm sending love to all the monsters in the world so that they'll be nice."
you.
And, and I thought you could describe our work like that. You could describe the Dalai Lama. You describe your work like that. All of us have this instinct, do we not? To like, we're just part of the circuitry and we just need to beam out, beam out. You described that earlier. And that's Mother Earth working her magic through all of us, I believe, right?
Yeah.
That is the heart of the mother beaming out to all of her children and just asking, hey, kids, can't you all get along? Didn't
Yeah.
our mothers all say that to us when we were squabbling? Kids, come on, can't you all get along? And so I appreciate that. And that is one thing that AI cannot do.
Right. Right.
It cannot generate emotion. It can't put it into the ethers. It can't put it into the noosphere, a la Thomas Berry. So we're a collection of subjects, we're a community of subjects, not a collection of objects.
Right.
A shift of our worldview.
Yeah.
Whole dead universe or living evolutionary creative womb of the cosmos? Which do you want to live in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, another favorite quote of mine from Thomas Berry is, the glory of the human has become the devastation of the earth.
Ah,
The devastation of the earth has become the destiny of the human.
mm,
If we let it.
Well, that's our work.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
working with this wounded earth, you know.
If we allow
we,
ourselves to.
we
Yeah.
are the earth, helping the earth heal itself.
yeah,
We are
It-
the universe universing in
Yeah.
this little locale on
Yeah.
this tiny rock spiraling its way through space.
And
yeah,
I will say one more thing about, because I talk about how if you're able to stare at the terror of the time and not, look away, but I basically say, I mean, there's a lot, this could go in a lot of different, I say there's basically 3 revelations that occurred to me
Okay.
in sustaining that gaze. And one of them is what we've already talked about, worldview change. If you can have a body experience of moving from that Cartesian self-isolation modalic metaphysics into this earth-based web of life, everything's connected,
Mhm.
you can get there. And the second one has to do with waking up the capacities of the human heart. You were talking about the human heart earlier. I used to teach a class for many years on the spiritual psychology of the human heart. And
Ooh,
we began by dissecting
yeah.
a pig heart so that you could really get a sense. A pig heart looks almost exactly like a human heart. So you could really get a sense of what the physical heart is all about. And that incredible, those valves, they're just like floating jellyfish, in the midst of this stream of, I mean, it's amazing, first of all. And then you'll see these little uh, globs of white tissue that are the neurons that are causing the heart to beat, So anyway, fantastic stuff. Then we
Back to your biology. Yeah.
yeah,
look at it as a psychological process that the vagus nerves connects to the heart. The heart gives out an electromagnetic field 5,000 times more powerful than the brain. I mean, the heart does all this. So when people are in proximity to one another, they start exchanging information and all this amazing stuff, the psychological heart. But then at the level of the spiritual heart, the heart is the mode of communication, the mode of communication between the soul of the world and your own individual soul.
yeah,
So through meditation practices, you can move into the chamber of the spiritual heart, reach out to a plant or a tree or something like that, and you can start to feel the energetics of that being because
Yeah.
your electromagnetic field is reaching out. The electromagnetic field of the tree is reaching out to you. It's intersecting like this, and you experience it as a feeling tone.
Mm-hmm.
So that
yeah,
feeling tone through the heart then rises up into your cognitive structures, and it's as though the tree is speaking English to you.
yeah,
Yep.
But that's not the level at which it communicated to you. It communicated as a feeling tone. And so sensitizing ourselves to feeling tones as a way of communicating with the soul of the world is one of the great gifts that occurs to you as you deal with the terror of our time.
mm,
And then the third one we
Yeah.
talked already about, the role of human consciousness in evolution and the fact that there is a new God image being born in the human psyche, equivalent to like the Old Testament God moving to a New Testament God. We're now moving to a whole nother image of what is of ultimate concern, however you want to talk about God as a metaphysical category. So those are the 3 things that happened to me as a result of sustaining this terror.
mm,
Sustaining the terror, right? Not being afraid of it,
No, but I do say,
contemplating it.
still,
I
Yeah.
do recommend that people microdose terror.
yeah, yeah, good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you don't want to be there all the time. No, you got to go back and read a good book. You got to
You
go out
find
and
joy in your
football,
life.
be
Yeah.
with your kids, whatever. But there are times where you do need to do that work, and the more people willing to do it, the more revelations will flow into the collective psyche.
Yeah,
Now, I just want to say, reflecting on what you said about, my little diatribe about luxury bunkers.
Okay.
I believe that we do need to call out that there are better solutions and call out this behavior. I'm not a hater, but when you just say there are better things, like go from me to we, and you'll live a better life.
And from our
Right?
side too, from me to we is what his
Yeah.
point was.
No, I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
But I need to call out, hey, there's what, you're gonna not say anything?
I still
Right?
think it comes back to consciousness, though. We can start nitpicking and breaking down the structural society and who's doing what. But
Yeah.
ultimately, as a group, as a collective, there's a lack of whatever that trigger is. And Randy has pointed out in this discussion that there has to be some major shift that happens for us to rise above all of that nonsense to something greater than ourselves. And it's not going to happen by discussion. It's going to happen by experience, and the experience is going to come from, unfortunately, in this particular discussion, we're looking at what happs when we see catastrophe and things that really
There's no
make a
other
shift.
choice.
We have
Yeah.
to, well, all of a sudden it's like, there's no water, there's no wire, Wi-Fi, the internet's gone
You're
down.
just left with
There's no
yourself, and you're
telephone,
lucky to be
and you're
alive.
saying, yeah, I'm alive, but I
Huh.
don't have my phone anymore.
All right, I got one more question. Raise your
Yeah.
hand.
I
David, I'll get you in just
I
a
gotta
minute.
respond once more
Okay.
here,
All right.
that absolutely you need to call out that stuff
Yeah.
out. To me, that's a function of the heart.
Yeah.
The Platonic verities of the good, the true, the beautiful, and I always like to
Yeah.
add just, as archetypal energies are
Yeah.
located in the heart. And you're speaking your truth when you call that out. So I'm not making any judgment about that. Absolutely, and it is absolutely absurd what they're doing. I'm just saying that you
Mhm.
want to be aware of the great
Polarities.
sadness
Yeah.
that's not apparent because they have power, and so it's hard to be sympathetic to jerks, but they weren't born jerks, right? They
They were
they
shaped,
they were
by
shaped that way, and we have to have compassion on the way they're shaped. At the same, we totally have to call it out. That's a part of your truth, is calling that out. And so
Okay.
I
One other discussion that was at the New Cosmic Story conference was this idea was floated around, and also in our interviews with Brian and Monica, that hey, that was necessary for us to evolve this trajectory of our worldview, our technology, our process, our progress, our mechanistic, because we needed to build the hardware. We needed to build the systems. We need to have the scientific understanding. It's going to be necessary for our evolution in the future. And it's similar to, I think, maybe Buckminster Fuller saying, hey, we have developed tomorrow's solutions today. We'll need them. Or it's similar to the fairy godmother that gives you these gifts early on your hero journey, and you put them in your pocket, not quite knowing how you're going to use them or what they're going to be useful for. But then when push comes to shove, you go, oh, here's the very tool I need to get past this threshold guardian and get on my way. So, I think that's an intriguing thought. And I wanted to know, is this all that we've done in Western society a necessary part of our evolution that somehow is going to, if we can transmute this into using these tools for good, more livingry, less weaponry, is it going to be needed in the future? I mean, we were facing an ice age, like we were going to get smashed back. If you look at 5 million years we only got 10 or 13 interstitial warming years here. 10 or 13,000 warming years before the next ice age comes. I don't know. What do you think? I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, yeah, just what I often say in beginning is acknowledging the native people around here. I live on the Salish Sea on South Whidbey Island, just outside of Seattle, a ferry ride outside of Seattle. And I remind people that when I do an invocation of those people and what they've done for this land and how they laid down the psychic structure of this land, is that 10,000 years ago there was a mile of ice above me, a mile of ice,
Yeah.
tall. 10,000 years ago,
Yeah.
so it's always good. Okay, so I'm going to give you a Jungian answer, and the short version of this is,
That's why we're here. Yeah.
in the beginning, human beings were encased in unconsciousness. There was no ego. They just lived, they lived out their lives. There were people didn't even have names. They were called, anyway, that's the idea, that they were in this ball of unconsciousness. And then slowly, the mythologies moved from matriarchal mythologies of this period to where there would be a light being, usually a male figure, differentiating out of the maternal unconscious whole. And that light being would be a representation of the emergence of consciousness, conscious awareness that you're alive, that you are something. And this evolved then to become completely separate and get cut off from the matriarchy. So now you have a pure patriarchy, completely unaware that it emerged from this other thing. And that's the Cartesian worldview, of separation. And now what's happening is there is an attempt to reestablish that connection between an isolated ego and the much deeper unconscious that has three layers: your personal unconscious, the collective unconscious of humanity, and the world unconscious of the world as a whole. So we're trying to reestablish that connection, establishing the ego's connection. So why then in evolution did the ego have to exist at all? And your point is that, yeah, well, we had to have that period of patriarchal ego strengthening in order to create the kinds of things that you're talking about. But if in the process of creating them, the ego remains isolated, then the technology will be used for evil purposes. If the ego then, with its new technology, reconnects with the maternal origins of the psyche, then we can
Find our
use
balance.
technology in service of the good, the true, the beautiful, and the just.
The goddess, she's due for a comeback. That's what I say.
Well, that's why people are having so many dreams about the goddess right now. She is an archetypal form that is asserting herself in compensation to the one-sided attitude of the patriarchy.
And boy, does she come through our work too. Oh my gosh. I want to say that you talked about dream work. I just want to finish with this. David, we'll get to you if you have a wind up kind of thing going on.
Comment.
So we had a gentleman that had an interesting take on dream work. He said, whatever you dream about, it's really about you. You would probably agree with that. And he said, what's the most significant dream? I said, well, I have a lot of them, but I have a recurring dream that mystifies me. It's when our dog, a wolf Malamute, who's passed away, keeps coming back to me. We keep finding each other, and he's cold and he's ragged, and he's just come in out of the cold. And then we connect and have this joyous reunion before he goes off again back into the mist. He goes, you realize you've just come in out of the cold. And I'm like, oh my God, my whole life I have spent coming in out of the cold, feeling like a total weirdo, didn't belong, didn't fit in. This world wasn't made for me. Where's my real home? I've come in out of the cold. And I really think that's the story of humanity right now, too. Or it has been over and over and over again, right? We are collectively trying to find our way home. We're trying to come in out of the cold. And
Yeah.
And our work for each other is to help each other walk home, walking each other home. I will say this about dreams. I just want to give a little caveat. Yeah, every dream is about you, but it's also more than you.
Thank you. I
So
agree with that.
there's
Yeah.
personal interpretations and there's collective interpretations. So if we were to take that dream and move it a little bit more towards the collective, it would be, dogs tend to be like really instinctual animals, dogs are never ambivalent about anything. That's very rare. They're going and then they're going over here and they're not going.
They
"Gee,
live in the moment.
I wonder if I could should I take a left or a right here? They don't have any of that. So they're instinctual beings. And so when you dream about dogs, it's talking about the instinctual side of yourself, where your ambivalence about being weird and stuff is no longer an issue. You're in your animal body. It's just you being you, the one that was born to be doing this work. It's
And
So
Took a
you're
few dark nights of the soul to get here, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly. And so now you have this redemptive dream, you know, of the animal coming back to you when you need it. And may all of our inner dogs come to us, that we can roam freely over the land
Recurring,
with joy.
recurring.
Yeah. All right, listen, let's close the conversation, but I want to just point out, Randy, you've
Oh, yeah.
given us such a nice, beautiful, broad perspective, also insightful, and also, you know, there is anxiety, and we're
Yeah.
all feeling it in different ways, a collective thing that's happening, and having someone of your scholarship be able to put that on the table in a way that we can digest. And I especially like the idea of how we respond to youth. We recently attended a conference at the I'm drawing a blank now, the Anthropology of Consciousness convention, and the youngsters were just saying they didn't have a lot of hope. The young people in the
They
circle,
were crying, some of
college
them,
students crying about why
about
we
this,
can't make any
literally
plans
tears.
because the world's so screwed up. So, but it was interesting that you flipped that around by saying, okay, so these are the warriors, these are the ones that will have to make that transition because they're already having the dark night of the soul at a young age to be able to change the directive of where we're going as a humanity. And maybe that these youngsters are the ones that are carrying the torch. Nice time to say that during the Olympics, but they're carrying the torch into the future with the potential of all that humanity can be.
Yeah. Well, the biggest problem is we don't have enough people in touch with the elder archetype for
Right.
these young people. They need to be mirrored by elders, and you can be a temporary elder. You don't have to be the elder all the time, but allow that archetype of the elder rise up into you to bless these kids, you know, bless them, because the problem is that most of the adults are as traumatized as they are. And
Right.
so they can't find it within themselves to do the blessing work that needs to be done for these youth, you know.
Or
So
there's no patterns out there. There's no support unless you seek it in these
Yeah.
various
Yeah.
methodologies that are now becoming more and more mainstream, I would say.
Well, you know, and the whole concept of elders doesn't even exist hardly in Western culture. We don't have that tradition of respecting someone and say, oh, now you're an old person, you're not an elder. And
Mhm.
so, yeah. So I will just point out, almost 25 years ago, I bought the website globalelders.com.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing on the website. I've held on to that domain name
Maybe it's
thinking
time
that
to activate
it's
it.
time to activate globalelders.com. Yeah.
Well, you're teaching elderhood too.
yeah.
You've got programs
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah, we have Saging International has sort of their standard program called Awakening the Sage Within, so that we can do spiritual eldering for the 21st century. And
Yeah.
I like to add that phrase, for the 21st century, because eldering is taking on a different shape now, given the circumstances that we're in. And it's really important that people step into their power around this. And so you check
And
out.
also, I'm sure elders are getting tired of just being shoved aside, right? And, oh, just be quiet, grandma, go sit over there. No, I mean, right? It's time to honor all that wisdom and perspective. I want to say also something that honoring our indigenous roots is what we're about. It's not like we're trying to go backwards, it's trying to pull that forward and add it to the mix, this indigenous wisdom. And we are in the Salish Sea
elder
right
wisdom,
here.
yeah.
We're broadcasting from Friday Harbor, Washington, my sister's place, which, by the way, my sister now hugs like this. She said, hug left to left, heart to heart. And I mean, that's beautiful. That's activating, like you're saying, that 5,000 times more output than the brain. But there was a Suquamish elder at this conference on Whidbey,
Right.
the New Cosmic Story. And he said something that everybody quoted thereafter. He said, we don't have a word for hope. We have a word,
Prayer.
pray, pray.
Yeah.
Appeal to this larger sphere of the cosmos. Appeal to its energy. Ask for its help. Bring that in.
Hope is a disconnect.
Understand you're a bigger piece of the puzzle.
Hope
You're
is a
cosmic.
disconnect where we're looking at something outside of ourselves to come, whereas prayer was something that's coming from within. And there's a deeper
And you're
connection. So it's a
acknowledging
more
it.
profound
Yeah.
perspective on, yeah, exactly.
We
Randy,
have a lot more to cover with you, Randy.
Yeah,
So
we're running
I
out of
appreciate
time,
these
but
couple
yeah.
of hours, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to close up then, if that
Okay.
would you do that, because I still got my candle burning here.
I want to mention that
excellent.
someone asked for the name of the poem. Who wrote the poem? Who is the poet?
Oh yeah, Aurora Levens Morales, and I'm about to read it again because I think hopefully it'll sound different to you after
Okay.
our hours of discussion.
Beautiful.
So,
Beautiful.
last night, I dreamed 10,000 grandmothers from the 1,200 corners of the earth walked out into the gap, one breath deep between the bullet and the flesh, between the bomb and the family. They told me we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious. So it will have to be us. They said, we will cup our hands around each heart. We will sing the earth's song, the song of water, a song so beautiful that vengeance will turn to weeping. The mourners will embrace, and grief replace every impulse towards harm. 10,000 is not enough, they said. So we have sent this dream like a flock of doves into the sleep of the world. Wake up. Put on your shoes. You who are hearing this, I am bringing bandages and a bag of scented guavas from my trees. I think I remember the tune. Meet me at the corner. Let's go. Let's go. So thanks for meeting me at this corner. And thank you all, Paul and Laura Lee, for holding this, creating the conditions for the possibility of grace to come into our midst.
Oh, thank you. And I think that is the message to all the younger generations out there. So it will have to be us, right?
Yes.
But that's empowering, is it not? Make the world you want to live in.
Thank you, Randy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Randy.
Let's
Appreciate it.
go. Let's go.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
Randy.